Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of AKP Sports Talk. Trivia 2. You know who it is. We've been doing this for a little while. That's Ari. I'm Korea. Ari, it's Wednesday, April 13th. How's your Wednesday going for you?
It's going pretty well. A lot of fun day baseball this morning / afternoon, so that was a lot of fun. And a couple more playoff games that we'll get into, and we'll talk about the ones tomorrow, or yesterday. But yeah, a lot of fun sporting events going on.
Yeah, there's been a lot of action, especially in MLB today. It's kind of crazy to think that the Mariners game, which is already delayed, we already knew that because of the weather, but the Mariners game it's at 4, and it's the last one of the day. It's kind of weird to think on a Wednesday, but we're here now. We had some good games yesterday. We're going to get right into those basketball games that we had yesterday. The first one was the Nets-Cavs. Nets had pretty much an early lead, pretty much very big lead. They were up 40-20 after the first quarter. It just looked like, the Nets were going to roll away. Their shooting problems were not going to be an issue in this game. We mentioned one of their biggest struggles is defense, and that caught up to them in that second half where Garland and Love and that Cleveland team made it a 6-point game at one point, and it was pretty much a battle to the end. I said it was going to be close, and it was. The Nets did prevail with the 115-108 win. And so the Nets will now be playing the number 2 seed Boston out of the Eastern Conference. This game was actually kind of fun. I could like this Cleveland team. This Cleveland team is good. I haven't really watched that much Cleveland basketball, unfortunately, this year. But from what I've got to see, we saw Darius Garland make some great shots in that game. Kevin Love from deep, Markkanen, and then you have veteran presence with Rondo as well. And then, you have some these upcoming guys, and hopefully if Jared Allen is healthy by Friday, that'll be a huge difference maker for a home game for the Cavs. But it was kind of weird that this game, it was pretty empty at the arena, but obviously that may be due to the unfortunate incident that happened that same morning in Brooklyn. But that doesn't matter. It was still a fun game to watch. Ari, what takeaways? What were your concerns about Cleveland or Brooklyn, or highlights from either team?
Yeah, shout out to Cleveland. They go being down 20 points after one quarter. They could have just kind of looked to the 8 seed game, but they definitely showed a lot of fight for a young team. You mentioned Garland led the way with 34. He's been leading the way the whole season, especially since Sexton got hurt. Mobley had 19. He kind of stepped up down low against. The Nets have Claxton, Drummond, so they have some size, but Mobley looks pretty good down low, and then some big shots from Kevin Love and some other guys. But Kyrie made his first 12 shots. He had that pretty insane buzzer beater at halftime. He was dialed in. Both him and Kevin Durant had double doubles. I think both of them with assists, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I think kind of looking ahead to the Boston-Brooklyn series, I think the fact that, Durant and Kyrie played that well and that efficiently, and they still only won by, I think it was, he said 7, I think. Definitely, and obviously Boston's, waves above Cleveland. So that should be an interesting series. But now Cleveland awaits the winner of tonight's Hawks-Hornets game.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah, you mentioned that Kyrie performance. It was just something that Kyrie does. He didn't miss a shot until the fourth quarter. You mentioned he went 12 for 12 from the field. He was just hitting everything inside the Barclays Center. He just looked like he couldn't miss. So that was great to see. But obviously, you mentioned shout out to Cleveland. They could have been down and out a half. They were already down by 20 after the first, but they just kept slowly coming back in this game. Making their shots. Driving into the paint, finding guys like Markkanen inside. Excuse me. It was great to see. One thing I also want to mention with this team, this Brooklyn team, is that, they don't even have Ben Simmons yet. And now that they got through the plan and they have a little bit of a wait until their first game against Brooklyn, that could be some good waiting time. And we've talked about how Ben Simmons could potentially be making it to the first round, barring any setbacks or anything. So that's something we have to keep in mind as well, that Ben Simmons could potentially return in this first round. against a Boston team that is not the healthiest, but they still look like they're playing great basketball. So that'll be a very interesting series to see. And obviously for the Cavs, they await the winner of the game that's literally about to start between the Hawks and Hornets. That game will be played Friday in Cleveland. That's going to be a fun one to watch. Yeah, so that was a fun game to watch yesterday. Game 2 yesterday was between Minnesota and Los Angeles. That game was pretty much the game of the night. Shout out to Minnesota, right? We were both wrong. We both went with the Clippers. Minnesota showed out, even without Karl-Anthony Towns. He fouled out with like 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Just a bad day for Karl-Anthony Towns. Looked like he got in his own head. Only finished with 8 points, but we mentioned D'Lo, right? We've talked about how big of an X factor this guy can be, and he was definitely the X factor. He was hitting the shots everywhere. He looked like he couldn't miss in that fourth quarter without Karl-Anthony Towns on the floor. And a lot of people were saying this. Even I think Ty Lue said in the post game presser yesterday. He said that this team, and I think I was watching Inside the NBA talk about it as well. They said this Minnesota team looked better on the court without Karl-Anthony Towns, and that's pretty much what it was. It was pretty much Los Angeles pretty much kind of setting the tone early, getting a big first quarter lead by 6, and then it was just pretty much back and forth. In Minnesota, they were down by like 10 in the fourth quarter at one point, and the Patrick Beverley show came to show up. He obviously his defensive presence, his antics, kind of changed the game, and that proved to be evident with the Timberwolves now getting the 109-104 victory against the Clippers yesterday, and now we'll be playing Memphis, which is a very exciting matchup between two young stars and Anthony Edwards and John Moran in the first round. That's pretty much a treat for all the people who love just watching basketball. Ari, what are your biggest? I know I see you shaking your head. You're shocked as I am with this Minnesota team, who a lot of people kind of counted out, but hey, they played in a game that they needed to win. They had the environment there. Looking at how packed Timberwolves Arena was yesterday, it was just nice to see. Even A-Rod on the sideline. Ari, what are your thoughts from this game?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was shocked. They got there for a reason. It's just taking into account, Cat's foul trouble the entire game, that the Clippers still couldn't win. The way I kind of talked about it last night is that, because the Clippers were kind of controlling most of the first 3 quarters for the most part, and especially in the third quarter they would go up at 8-10, and then Minnesota would come back, and cut it to 3 or 4. So it's the Timberwolves were the annoying fly that keeps bugging you, that you think every time you think it's going to be gone, it keeps coming back, and they just kept fighting, even with Towns getting in foul trouble early. They had the lead at halftime despite Towns' 4 fouls. I think he had 2 points at half, maybe 4 points, something like that, at halftime, and the Timberwolves were still winning. Paul George, held his weight, 34 points. I think he had 17 in the third, or he had 15 plus in the third quarter alone. But no one else really stepped up alongside him. Norman Powell had a pretty big first half, but he didn't do much in the second half. It didn't seem like he really played much in the second half. He had, I think, 14 points early, and it didn't seem like he really played much. It seemed like most of the starters were playing, most of the second half. And then, with Zubac on the court, he was just kind of too slow when the Timberwolves would go small with McDaniels and Vanderbilt and all of them with Cat and foul trouble. It seemed like Zubac was just kind of too slow for that kind of small, lengthy lineup that Minnesota would put out, or Hartenstein, whoever would be at the big, for the Clippers. So that was kind of one thing that I noticed. But yeah, it should be, I think at most the Wolves take one game against Memphis. So I think it'll be either a sweep or in 5. But credit to them. They definitely showed out. There's definitely a great crowd presence. It felt like a playoff atmosphere, at the game. There's the weird incident with the girl trying to glue herself onto the court in the second quarter, but after that happened, the Wolves went a 16-5 run, I think. So it definitely helped them in whatever way. But yeah.
You find your secret sparks. Maybe that was the secret spark, the woman trying to glue herself to the court. Obviously, that's another situation. But, yeah, you mentioned just Paul George's efficiency in this game. Look, he shot almost 50% from the field. He had 34 points. He went on that big run, I believe, in the third quarter. And it just seemed like, it was just the Paul George show, and he just couldn't do it by himself. You mentioned guys like Powell and, even Reggie Jackson, which is trying, he was trying, but every time he just would, be one-on-one. It's with Pat Bev, and, Pat Bev knows this team so well, obviously, since he just played with them the previous season. So it was just a lot of probably defensive antics by by Patrick Beverly, especially in that fourth quarter as well. But you just mentioned it, just lack of made shots for the Clippers. Didn't look like they were just hitting their shots. Yeah, pretty much. I like Minnesota, but I don't like them to win this series. I pretty much have them losing in about 5. I give them a 1 or maybe even 2 games if they get lucky against the Memphis Grizzlies. I think this Minnesota team is maybe like a few pieces away from actually being a contender, but I do like this matchup in the first round. But for the Clippers, they await their winner on Friday. They will be playing the winner of San Antonio and New Orleans, who play later tonight after this first game between the Hawks and the Hornets. So now that we have 2 playing games now, we might as well go a little more deeper into the playoff talks now that we have 2 confirmed matchups in the first round. We already said Memphis will be playing Minnesota in the 2-7 matchup. Out of the West and out of the East, it's the 2-seed Boston versus the 7-seeded Brooklyn. I obviously, one matchup is more intriguing than the other in terms of, just how Boston is, not as healthy now as they were at the beginning of the season. And Brooklyn, they're starting to get healthier. And I saw these conspiracy theories that maybe Brooklyn tanked because obviously Kyrie's vaccination status, playing more road games, but now that doesn't matter anymore since New York lifted the vaccine mandate. But I want to start on the East. Let's talk Boston, Brooklyn. Obviously, big storyline. KD and Kyrie, pretty much tandem. They get 75 to 80% of their points. We see what Boston's doing. They ended the season very strong with Tatum and Brown, pretty much leading that charge in Boston. What are you looking for in this matchup, Ari?
Yeah, I mean, you have the dynamic duos for both teams with Tatum and Brown and Durant and Kyrie. So I think, those 4 are going to do their work, like they always do. So I think the X factors, I think for both teams, I think it's going to be Seth Curry for Brooklyn. Historically, he's shot really well in the playoffs for whatever team he's been on, and so I think they're going to need him to step up. I don't remember him doing too much yesterday. I didn't get to watch the entire game, but I don't think he did much. So the Nets are going to need him to step up, and then I think Marcus Smart for the Celtics as that third guy. I'm currently assuming Ben Simmons isn't going to play. If he plays off, it's going to be a huge difference, but I'm just assuming he's not going to play just based on what we know right now. So yeah, I mean, Marcus Smart and Seth Curry are, I think, the 2 kind of X factors outside of the obvious, 2 ahead of them on both teams. The last I heard, I don't think Robert Williams is going to be ready for the series, as far as I know. But I feel like with a lot of these injuries, it's kind of like a day-by-day kind of status at this point, because even if they can't play for game 1, they could obviously come back for game 5 or 6 or 7, or if it goes that far. So that'll be worth watching. And then, I mean, yeah, we saw Drummond and Claxton have pretty solid games. So it'll be them against, Al Horford and Dice for the Celtics. So that's kind of what I'm watching for.
Yeah, you mentioned the health of Robert Williams. That's going to be one of the biggest things for that Boston team. That's going to be losing a lot of defensive presence there. But obviously, one of the guys who really has to step up is Marcus Smart in terms of being that third guy on that team, because obviously we know about how Tatum and Brown can play, and they've played amazing pretty much all year. And Jason Tatum is now taking his game to the next level from being a star to now being potentially a superstar. And we're seeing that flourish in front of our own eyes. For Brooklyn, we know KD and Kyrie. We've seen what they can do on a night-to-night basis. But you mentioned Seth Curry, and we've seen him in the playoffs. Obviously, when he was a Blazer, he was shooting well. When he went to Philly, he was shooting well, and now he's in Brooklyn. And I think he's going to be a really big X factor for this team to see if, with, say, like Katie and Kyrie, they're having bad nights, or maybe one gets in foul trouble or something, you're gonna need someone to step up, someone who can actually shoot the ball well, to pretty much replace that. And I think Seth Curry could be that step up guy as well. I'm assuming that Ben Simmons is probably not going to make it to the series as well. But if he is, that's definitely a scary 7 seed. I think that 7 seed could, and this is hypothetical. I'm saying if Ben Simmons is healthy, I think they definitely could win that series against Boston. Having a more defensive presence is which is one of their weaknesses right now. No defense. Now having pretty much a defensive player of the year candidate in Ben Simmons when he's playing games and not on the bench in street clothes when he's playing the games. So that could be a huge X factor for Brooklyn, and then obviously for Boston. You mentioned Marcus Smart. I definitely could see him being that third role between Tatum and Brown as well. We've seen him elevate his game a little bit, but he needs to just be more consistent in the playoffs and kind of have that consistency as he was in the regular season. So those are pretty much 2 X factors I believe in as well. Also, you can mention Andre Drummond as well, kind of their big man presence for Brooklyn, since they really don't have any other size other than KD. And then obviously you have, was it Claxton or something coming out the bench as well. So I think, having that kind of rim protecting, interior defense is going to be huge for this Brooklyn team to try and stop Boston as well. Let's move west now between Minnesota and Memphis. Pretty much series of the young stars between John Morant and Anthony Edwards. We saw what Minnesota can do, but obviously Memphis has been dominating. This is their best season that we've ever seen Memphis have in a long time. John Morant has taken his game to the next level. Definitely a candidate for most improved player. What a year for John Morant. And now he's fully healthy coming back for this series. We've seen what Jaren Jackson can do. Jonas Valanciunas will definitely be a big key member of that team for interior defense. But
you mean
I don't.
Steven Adams?
Oh yeah, I forgot Valanciunas got traded. I'm sorry. Steven Adams. Yeah, I'm sorry. Steven Adams. I mean, we've seen what Steven Adams can do. He's with his little stint in New Orleans and down in OKC for a long time. So he's definitely been one of the biggest contributors to this Memphis team. And on the opposite side of the ball, you have Minnesota. We saw what they can do. D'Lo can drop a good 25 sometimes. Edwards is guaranteed to at least drop maybe 30. Karl-Anthony Towns obviously had one of those bad games, but if he has those games where he's just in his head, emotions get played out, that's just what that's Karl-Anthony Towns' play style of play. Very emotion, all in or all out. So what do you like in this matchup, and who are your big X factors between Minnesota and Memphis?
Yeah, I think it's obvious that Cat is going to have to step up, more than he did the other day. I think that they're going to need – we know how crucial he can be as a 3-point shooter that we've seen all season. So I think Steven Adams, isn't the best defender on the perimeter. So they're going to need to I think they can get a lot of ISOs out there, whether it be Cat shooting from 3 if Adams is, leaving in some space, or blowing right by him if he's, right up on him. So I think that's going to be a huge factor. I think Desmond Bane for Memphis and his shooting from the outside would be huge for the Grizzlies. I mean, we know Jaw's going to do his thing every game. So, some other guys like Bane, and then I think Tyus Jones is one of their other guards, I believe. I
know it's one of the Jones brothers. It's one of the Jones.
Yeah, one of the Jones. Yeah, but I think Bane's going to be the biggest X factor. And then you have Jaren Jackson, on Memphis and his offensive capabilities. I don't know. I mean, Memphis has been doing it all year, whether they've had Ja or not. Their bench, has been even their bench players have been in situations where they have to play a lot of minutes. I think depth for the Grizzlies is going to be a huge difference maker. Minnesota went a little bit deep in the playing game, but Memphis is definitely a deeper team with the best player on the court at all times in Ja. So, I think Minnesota might get one. Might get one at home, but I think Memphis should win the series pretty easily overall.
I definitely agree with you 100% there. I mean, Ja is pretty much a difference maker for that Memphis team. And even without him, they still have solid guys. Desmond Bane, I forgot to mention him. He's definitely underrated this year. Great contributors for that Memphis team. You mentioned contributors. You mentioned Jaren Jackson and Dylan Brooks, 2 guys, who just got drafted about a couple years ago, who've just been quietly, leveling up their games in Memphis. And then you have a veteran presence inside with Steven Adams. You have, Brandon Clark, and I think it is Tyus Jones that's on
I
Memphis.
know one was on the Spurs, and then there's one Jones on.
It is Tyus because Trey's on the Spurs. So yeah, you have Tyus Jones as well. Great contributor, Zaire Williams. So obviously you mentioned how Memphis is more deep, and I think that's going to be one of their key differences to why Memphis does win this series. They have a very deep roster. They even bring out Jared Culver, who a lot of people forgot about Jared Culver, but he's definitely not the biggest contributor, but he's definitely contributed to this team a lot. This team just runs so deep, and shout out to Minnesota. I loved their playing game. Just the atmosphere in Minnesota. That was their first time back playing playoff technically basketball in Minnesota for the first time since 2018. And Minnesota, they've not had any playoff success, so great to see them. But I definitely see Memphis winning maybe 5 or 6 games to move it past the second round. I want to give Minnesota maybe 1 or 2, maybe one of those home games, but I think Memphis will easily win this in 5, just because of the comparison between how deep this Memphis roster goes. And, obviously one of the biggest factors we've totally talked about Karl-Anthony Towns' play. If he wants to, be a really big contributor in this series, he has to keep his emotions in check, not be in foul trouble by halftime. ODF, and then in the third quarter, you already have 5 fouls. It's going to keep using your games. So definitely some big factors, but I definitely see Grizzlies probably in 5 winning the series and moving on to the second round. So obviously, we'll keep you up with the playing games. Obviously, the first game is just starting right now, and it is a tie game between Charlotte and Atlanta, with the next game later on being the San Antonio Spurs and the New Orleans Pelicans. And on Friday, we'll give you our reactions to those games along and some more playoff predictions for the NBA. But now we're going to switch into a little bit of MLB here. Obviously, there is a big story this morning. Clayton Kershaw, it was his first start of the season. This man was just absolutely eating on the mound. He went 7 innings perfect, 13 Ks, and they pulled him out. And he was only at about 80 pitches. And, this was kind of a big speculation. I was watching that game live, actually, because I actually drafted Clayton Kershaw in our fantasy baseball league. And obviously I had a lot more interest in it after that. And look, they said that I think Dave Roberts said that he wanted Clayton Kershaw to go about 75 to 80 pitches. But obviously, in that kind of capacity, you're throwing a perfect game. There's only been the last perfect game. We know this one because we watched it together. Felix Hernandez back in 2012. That's the last perfect game. It's been almost a decade. That's why it's so controversial. I personally think that he should not have been taken out. But in his post-game conference, Clayton Kershaw said he is basically blaming the lockout. Obviously, that happened with the MLB and the MLBPA. We've talked about that so many times. But Ari, I as a true baseball fan, you hate to see something like this in the 7th inning, and then literally the next inning he loses the perfect game. And it wasn't even his fault. It was the relief pitcher coming in and Gary Sanchez having a single. So, are you team Kershaw or are you team Dave Roberts? I already can tell you're team Kershaw.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's one thing we're seeing more, no hitters as of late, and so it's one. If there's a no hitter, then I would be perfectly fine with them taking him out. But a perfect game is a whole different story. You mentioned the 75 to 80 pitch count and all, and that's great and all, but and then they hit back home runs in that top half of the 8th. So it's also it was only a 3-0 game. So there's that, but then it was 6-0 by the time they went to the bottom of the 8th. It's just I think they should have just given him, as soon as he gets at one base runner, then they take him out. But they should have just given him a chance to complete the last 6 outs of a perfect game, something that we mentioned haven't seen since 2012. And I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but there's not been very many in the entire history of the MLB, and for a reason, because of how difficult it is. I mean, Kershaw was dialed in. Even I want to say he struck out the side in that 7th inning. He was every pitch is working for him. So it's cool to see him back after being kind of hurt for most of last year, and just recent years he's kind of struggled to stay healthy. So hopefully this kind of leads to him dialing in his vintage, performances moving forward. But just going back to this afternoon's game, yeah, I mean, there's no reason why Dave Roberts shouldn't. I get the pitch count and all coming off the injuries last year and everything, but to me, you don't mess with history at that point. And with the way he was looking, he wasn't slowing down at all. It's like, well, yeah, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Jeff Passan of ESPN, obviously pretty much the MLB insider, he mentioned that there have been actually 23 perfect games in all of baseball, and baseball's been going on since the United States was almost a thing, and we've seen the lack of perfect games. Obviously, this pretty much this side of the decade, and he looked like he was dominant. And you mentioned the back-to-back homers, the very next inning, and literally the first two were back-to-back pitches from Cody Bellinger and Gavin Lux. So I don't know why you decide to take Clayton Kershaw out when you even expand on your 3-0 lead to make it 6-0, which makes it more comfortable for Clayton Kershaw. He doesn't have to have pressure that it's like the Felix Hernandez one where it's 1-1 game. You don't have to have any kind of pressure because of that. And you have so much room that he was only at 70 pitches. Like, he was only about 80 pitches, and he was heading into the 8th with 13 Ks. And Ks have to take at least 3 pitches. So that's he's basically averaging almost 3 pitches a K, which is ridiculous, which is why I'm saying that you should have left him in. Don't know what Dave Roberts was doing. And I saw this little fun stat that Dave Roberts did the same thing back in 2016 with Rich Hill when he was going, I think perfect, and he decided to take him out because of his pitch count. So I think it just ruins the game of baseball. It ruins the fun of it. You see, it doesn't matter what team you're on. If you see a perfect game, you want to encourage your pitcher. You want to have, because it's history in the making.
I saw on Twitter, even the Twins fans, it was in Minnesota, even the Twins fans are booing that they took him out. So, it goes both ways, like you said.
Exactly. You want to root for the perfect game because, yes, you're down 6-0. What else you got to root for? The perfect game. Exactly. And you take him out because of that? I don't agree with that. But, Clayton Kershaw, he was perfect to me. He didn't allow a single hit, single person on. He went 7 innings, 13 Ks, no hits, no runs, no people on base. So he went up 21 down for me. I'm not complaining, but yeah, it's definitely a big stain in the game. I personally don't agree with that. If I was Dave Roberts, I would have left him in, and I would have Clayton Kershaw complain to me if he wants to be out versus me making that decision, because I don't want my pitcher to lose that confidence, because especially you mentioned Clayton Kershaw is coming off a very, rough year with battling injuries, and pretty much ever since around 2019 or something, it's just been the decline because of his injuries. But it looked like this was his revenge game, and you might as well finish it off if he's just dominating. And this was his first out of the year. And yes, in the post game, Clayton Kershaw was saying they can blame the lockout and blah, 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 whatever. Yeah, you can blame the lockout in some aspect because, shortened spring training, shortened time for offseason negotiations or whatever. But at the same time, if you're Dave Roberts, you got to leave him in. You just have to. You can't take a pitcher out if he's on the verge of a perfect game. I've only seen that a few times, and I never like it, because I encourage, unless he is gassed and he's thrown 120 pitches through 8 innings, I'm keeping him in because I want to see that magic happen. So it was definitely a sad sight to see this morning, but Dodgers eventually got the win. But come on now. Clayton Kershaw, definitely the big story of the day, going 7 innings, striking out 13 of 21 batters, which is ridiculous. And then literally in that next top half of the 8th, you see Cody Bellinger, Gavin Lux, and Austin Barnes go back to back and make it 6-0, that's the 7, 8, 9 of their lineup. That's the bottom of their lineup, which is kind of shocking to me that Cody Bellinger 7th, 1, and 2, that they went back to back with 7, 8, 9, which is confirmed that the Dodgers are such a scary team. And 3, they don't even have Trevor Bauer back yet. And he's now on administrative leave through the 22nd, which is next Friday. But still,
yeah,
they don't even have one of their aces back yet. So
definitely a video game type team.
Yeah, it's definitely a stacked team. Ari, do you have anything else you want to talk about?
No, yeah, and it's still early in the MLB season, obviously, so we'll be as we get more of a sample size of all these stats and records and all of that, we'll start diving into more into them. But yeah, that was all I had today.
Yeah, definitely. We will be back on Friday. Like I guys mentioned, we'll be recapping today's 2 9-10 matchups. Winners of these will be playing Cleveland respectfully in the East, and then the Clippers in the West on Friday. We'll give you a a little preview of those matchups as well on Friday. And on Friday, we'll be giving our official NBA playoff predictions. All rounds, all playoff games, not all playoff games, all playoff rounds, all the way to the finals, and we'll be giving our finals predictions. And obviously, next week, we're about a week away from the draft, so that's going to be a lot of draft analysis. Who should be taking who at where, and all that stuff. So tune into a lot of NFL content coming at you next week. But for now, this has another been an episode of AKP Sports Talk. That's Ari. I'm Korea. We will see you guys on Friday for the NBA.